I'd rather not have to share this by myself. I mean,
it was the first. It counterbalanced me.
Nobody saw that.
wait, can somebody? Where the hell did the option go to share the deck from MeetEcho? That's still there. Chairs? Any chairs can help me out?
It's the one next to the hand raise near on the left-hand side.
Oh, share preloaded side. Thank you. Was that Ted? Who was that?
That was Ted.
That was Ted. Thank you, Ted. There we go.
Head in the sky.
All right.
That might be the closest you come to being ceiling cat.
I'm just going to warn you that I've had so much coffee this morning that I'm probably going to need to duck out for a minute during a talk. It's going to be one of those days. Yes. All right, well, it is 10:01, so we could get started, or we could wait a few minutes. May as well get the note well up there. You guys know what this is about. Additionally, note that this session is being recorded, whether you are wearing a red lanyard or not. I mean, I can try speaking a little bit closer. Okay, all right. So just note that this session is being recorded, regardless of the color of your lanyard. Some useful tips on the slide.
Are we starting then? All right. Well, we're starting then. Can you back up to the earlier slides, please? So, thanks everybody who bravely made it to the room on Friday morning. Appreciate the turnout, and thanks to everybody online as well in your own home time zone. Next slide. I did want to make note of the note well. This is still an IETF meeting, even if it is a Friday morning. How do I really feel? Thanks. And yes, we are still wearing masks, so please keep your mask on and keep your mask on at the mic. And as somebody else said in another session, unless you're standing on the pink X over here, please keep your mask on. All right, I think we know the drill then. Next slide. You have all of the resources. Here's the agenda for today. I think we have a volunteer note taker in the shape of Chris Lemons. Thank you. But don't let that stop anybody else from getting into the shared document and helping out. In particular during Chris's presentation, but also to help make sure that we capture names and details and whatnot. All right. Any bashes to the agenda? Not hearing any bashes to the agenda. Everyone caught up on their email? Anything cool happening on Facebook? Anyone? Anyone? Okay, then we will chug right along in the agenda to first up is the OpsCons document. Was that Jake or Spencer? Who's doing the update?
Oh, okay.
And just a word about this agenda item. We, working group last called this document a while ago. It's been through IETF last call and is now continuing to get comments from the ISG. So this is an update on what has happened since you last saw it.
I'm Spencer Dawkins, and without a mask is okay?
Yeah.
Okay. And good morning. This is going to go either really fast or really slow. I don't know, asking for a show of hands is the right thing to do on who has read the draft dash 11, especially diffs compared to dash 10. Excellent. Jake has read it. So, okay, so that does imply something about how, things going forward. Next slide, please.
One moment.
Okay.
Sorry. Trying to
Phew.
do too many things at once.
Cool. So just in case you've forgotten where we've been since dash 10 went to IETF last call. So we had 21 GitHub issues created. Most were from area review team reviewers. And very soon after that, we were on an ISG ballot, like the next telechat, and we got 2 yes ballots, and 10 no objection ballots, which is not surprising, and 1 discuss ballot, which we can talk about in more detail. That created 9 GitHub issues, basically 1 per AD with comments or discuss positions. And so actually most of the comments that we've been getting have been from the review team's comments that we were still working on when we hit the ISG telechat, and a number of the ballots on the ISG telechat were, please address the comments from my area team reviewer. So not a surprise there. So we got dash 11 submitted the last day, well, basically as of the internet draft cutoff. So that's basically where we've gotten on GitHub comment resolution. We have a small number of issues that have been addressed in GitHub. Dash 12 has not been submitted yet because we submitted dash 11 at the beginning of the week. And we have 2 issues that remain open just from lack of time to work on them. I don't think either one of them are particularly big. And the editor's plan is to address the last 2 issues and submit dash 12. I could stop for objections.
Oh, yeah, you didn't want me to advance slide.
Well, I mean, anything is fine. Yeah, go ahead and please, yeah. So this is a high-level description of what changed between dash 10 and 11. And if you bring up the draft of the data tracker and look at the diff from dash 10 to dash 11, you'll see this. The 2 things that I think are worth mentioning are, well, the 3 things are highlighted here, either in what started out as yellow or in purple text. So we synchronized the abstract and introduction sections because our intention was to keep these synchronized, but we did have a couple of changes that were made in one place and not the other. So that got significantly better. We added a lot of definitions and scoping text, and honestly, a significant number of the comments that we got from area review teams and things like that were, I don't understand if this is in scope for whatever the definition of this is. And part of that is because they were asking about specific use cases. And so we were trying to make that clearer. And one of the other things is that we did have some text that seemed helpful to say about RTP, but that took us a little bit out of the general purpose streaming video and media that we were talking about in most of the document. So that. We added some notes about video bit rates and explaining what was going on there, maybe a little bit better in the section that talked about video bit rates. We had some comments about the definition of baseline for people who are monitoring, because our advice was to say, notice when things change from what you expect to see, and try to make it clear that we're not thinking, oh, this is constant bit rate video or anything like that. So we're expecting fluctuations, but if there's 3 times as much traffic there today as you thought there was yesterday, that might be worth noticing. We cut a lot of the details about unpredictable usage profiles. To be honest, that this was something that got added early in the draft and grew as things went along. It started out talking about issues with sudden growth of peer-to-peer networking in certain access networks and things like that. It grew to include observations about the pandemic and things like that. And then it referenced the IAB workshop that was talking about the impact of COVID and things like that on networks. So we cut a lot of the early details out. And I think I should say here, and I should probably say several times during the discussion, that the draft is better for these comments. So that. We added some background about adaptive bitrate streaming, which if you're not coming at this from the streaming media community, you may not have that background. And we were, like I say, we're just trying to describe at a high level what adaptive bitrate streaming is before we start talking about its effects. We added competing goals text for personalized ad insertion, and this was in response to Roman's discuss, the only discuss belt that we had. And the topic of personalized ad insertion came up during the sector review, which was actually submitted after the IESG telechat where this was validated, and that's fine. So, like I say, we were working on that, and we'll, I'll wait to give an update on that till we get to the last slide, I think. I basically rewrote section 6, which was talking about the effect of transport protocols. And I added the idea of media transport protocols at the beginning of section 6. We can talk about that, but it seemed like a helpful thing to me because we had protocols that might be right underneath media, or it might be underneath another protocol that was right underneath media, all the way down. So trying to be clear about what the first protocol was that was right underneath media in a protocol stack, and everything else is what that's trying to get at. We provided a number of clarifications about media encryption, about tunneling, and about VPNs, and about several other things. In, I think that's section 7. And we made so many additions in the acknowledgement session. Next slide is would show you what that looked like. So yeah, we got comments, and if the point was to get comments, we got comments, and these are the people who commented. Next slide, please. So the editor's take on the path forward is to ask the working group to object to any problematic changes soon. Please pay special attention to the changes that are in color on slide 3. They are the ones that probably have the most likelihood of surprising people in the working group. And then to address the last 2 issues and submit -12. To ask Roman if we have addressed his discussed comments. Yeah, Jake, you want to say a word about this?
Sure, Jake Holland. Yeah, I cornered Roman on his way out of the plenary yesterday, or day before, I guess. He said that he's, very busy guy, has had trouble wrapping this up. He got a little hung up because he is trying to propose text. There's like some subtle, he wasn't able to cover. He had lost context with some of his other responsibilities at the moment, but he's working on some text that he wants to suggest for finishing up his discussed comments. So, but he said he thinks it's addressable and is trying to get there. He said Eric's been poking him every few days and doing the right thing, and he just hasn't quite got to it yet. So I'm anticipating eagerly getting that wrapped up.
Could we give a short round of applause for Eric cornering Roman? And one of the advantages of coming to the IETF in person is that you can actually corner area directors between the stage on Wednesday night and the restrooms and bars. Then asking Eric to approve -12-ish. And forward to the RFC editor. Asking for your thoughts. I would ask the chairs how you guys want to handle discussion on this, because this could be really short or really long.
In the room, you mean, or generally?
I mean now, yeah.
So I would say that if there are any comments or questions in the room, it'd be good to at least surface them now, and we can see how long that will actually take. Doesn't look like the caffeine has hit the bloodstream yet. I did make a note to send to the mailing list to say, to follow up your particular points about checking the document, especially the highlighted items in this slide deck. So if there aren't any other comments in the room, there will be another bite at the apple on the mailing list, to which I'm sure you're all subscribed.
Because that would be the right thing to do. Actually, so Kyle is presenting, just like I said, the diff between -10 and -11. And if you want to just kind of fly through that at a relatively slow rate, it would give up people ideas about what changed and what didn't. So, and like I said, you can just kind of slide through. But there's a lot of text that did not change. It's not what he's showing right now. Yeah, see, there's a lot of stuff that didn't change. And there's a lot of stuff that was deleted, especially the stuff in section 6 and the stuff in is that section 3 or 4 on unpredictable usage profiles. A lot of deletions in both of those. So, like I said, there's a significant number of words that changed. Almost all of these were done in conjunction with reviewers that I think there's one ISG member that I did not have a GitHub ID for, and everybody else is tagged in the conversation. So it's not like Jake and Ali and I went off in a corner and just started typing. But so this has actually had eyes on it, just maybe not the working groups.
Eric?
Yeah, Eric Vink, as an AD. So thank you for all the change. As you have seen on the diff,
Yeah.
they are not small change, I read through them. It's mostly editorial clarification. So that's not really deserve another last call because you change nothing substantial, technically substantial. But I would really encourage this working group to review the document while we still can change it or revert some change.
Sure, sure.
Yep.
And like I said, we still got 2 issues to resolve that are in GitHub. Jake has started reminding me that at this point, with the document having left the working group, we should be trying to respond to comments rather than trying to continue to evolve the document. So that is, he has also encouraged me to behave, and I'm doing my best to do that as well.
Great. Thank you, and thank all of your co-authors as well. I kind of think that we've gotten as far as we're going to this morning in this room on this topic. Looking around for disagreement.
And if we are bike shedding word text in the document, that may be a fine place to stop.
Yep. No, I think as Eric said, I think it's been all improvement so far.
Yeah.
So now it's just to make sure that everybody's had their opportunity to nod, and then we'll move on and declare victory. All right.
Yeah. Thank everyone in the working group who commented, and thank all the reviewers who have helped to improve this document.
Great. Thanks, Spencer. All right. Next up, we have a currently active working group document. Renan, are you ready?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thanks, Leslie. Hi, everyone. My name is Renan Krishna, and I will be presenting an update to our draft. This is a joint work with Akbar Rahman. Next slide, please. So the updates to the draft are in the abstract, the introduction, and section 5. We'll talk about these changes in the next few slides. Next slide, please. Many thanks to Sanjay Mishra for the feedback, in particular asking for clarifications in the abstract and introduction on the mailing list yesterday. In the abstract, we have added a couple of lines. The first line specifies that we would want to discuss the expected behavior of XR applications in terms of the workload that a network operator can expect in a use case such as ours. The next line specifies the service requirements that the XR application have in terms of the expected response times, throughput, resource utilization, reliability, and availability. Next slide, please. The updates in the abstract are further elaborated in the introduction. Sorry, Leslie, the previous slide for slide 4. Yeah. So the updates in the abstract are further elaborated in the introduction. We point out that the XR traffic's workload on the operator's network will have parameters that are heavy-tailed, making it hard to predict the resources that should be operationalized. Examples of such parameters include the amount of data carried in the connection, connection duration, burst length, idle time, etc. Secondly, we point out that service requirements of XR applications will have QoE factors, such as the need to avoid motion sickness that will be unique to them. Next slide, please. So section 5 is where we propose to elaborate on the abstract and introduction if the working group agrees. Section 5.1 will elaborate on the problem of what the network operator can expect in terms of AR/VR or XR traffic workload to be able to make informed decisions on resource deployment. Section 5.2 will elaborate on the problems of XR-specific service requirements such that QoE factors like motion sickness can be met by appropriate provisioning of operational resources. Next slide, please. So picking up the discussion from IETF 114, we are trying to identify issues in XR media delivery in an operational sense that would be within the scope of the MOPS working group, and it would be great to get some pointers from the working group. So, for example, the first issue is offloading to the edge the only solution to deal with the problems of heat dissipation of the XR devices? and their limited battery power as they run computationally intensive tasks in our use case. Now, our draft focuses on leveraging the edge devices, but we'd welcome inputs from the working group that discuss other pertinent operational ways that could be solutions. Secondly, for the edge computing solution for our use case, what kinds of underlying technology do we envisage? For example, 5G or Wi-Fi. How will the XR media delivery scale if we increase the number of users? How to ensure that the edge servers are adequately provisioned. For example, how many servers, what topology to connect them, where to place them, what capacity to assign to the links, etc. How to migrate users' XR media state as they move. How to operationally respond to changes in bandwidth, creation and destruction of logical associations between software components, etc. This, of course, is not an exhaustive list, but we wish to prioritize the most important issues that the working group feels are appropriate for inclusion in the draft. And it would be great to have everyone's feedback, please. So with the chair's permission, we'd like to open the floor for a discussion.
Yes, please. I think I'll give people the opportunity to get in queue, and appreciate if people will use the Meet Echo queue. We had some good discussion around this document at the last IETF, and then we sort of foundered in terms of follow-up on the list. So I'd like to make sure that we take things in real time. So go ahead, please.
Yeah, Jörg. Hi, Rena. Nice to meet you again.
Hi, Jörg. How are you?
Two quick things. On the one hand, I would have I was reading through the data, and I would have loved to see some numbers.
Mm-hmm.
We all know, on ranges or typical characteristics of AR traffic. We all know that there's many different flavors and resolutions and whatnot, but I think it would be helpful to be more specific in these cases, because that ultimately also governs what you can do. The other comment I wanted to make is to the second to last bullet on this slide here, migrating states. So we probably want to have a careful differentiation between systems aspects and the related protocol aspects, I would expect. That's just a thought, just food for thought. Thanks.
Yeah, Jörg, I agree with them. They're really good points. In particular, we are looking for numbers for sure.
Colin?
So, Colin Jennings, I'm with Cisco, and I don't normally talk about Cisco products, but I'm going to talk about them just briefly here in the context of providing you some numbers to try and answer that question. So it's a product called Webex Hologram. It records me or it records a user with a set of light field cameras as a light field, transmits it up to the cloud, transmits it down to an AR headset, and then you see the person sitting across the table from you as an AR hologram, and it's a very photorealistic system. If you want to see videos of it, Google Webex Hologram. It's shipping to customers now. So in the context of that, there are, I have specific numbers of what we're doing on that. We can share some of those now. I'll share some of those in a minute. But there are, we've watched and followed what a lot of different vendors are doing in this space. And I think this draft would benefit by talking about a little, like, I think that now the industry's evolved enough that you can start talking about more details on how this works. There are three major ways that we see this type of XR-based images and data coming across the network. And different vendors have taken very different approaches to it. I would say a bunch of vendors have gone down the texture mapped polygon approach. So what they're sending is, a bunch of polygons and the texture maps for them, and the texture maps are updating with a video stream, and the polygons are updating with some mesh data. And that's one representation we see widely used. We see a representation widely used that is point clouds, where you're basically sending a bunch of teeny points, a huge cloud of them. Each point has a color. You can think of it as a little teeny colored sphere when you render it, and it results stuff. That has a different data characteristic. So both of those have very different bandwidth and data characteristics. And then the third one that we use that's very popular, Magically, Cisco, some others, is this light field approach, where with the light field, you can think of it as almost sort of, 5-dimensional video or something like that. But it is, we're trying to send the color of every ray of light going through every point in the room in every different direction. And you might be like, that's the field, it's this 5-dimensional field. And you compress it very much like you compress video. Everybody takes an existing video standard and extends it to do the multi-dimensional slicing approach. So I think the interesting thing on these numbers is, so since we're using the light fields, I'm going to talk about numbers in that space. You might think that that's a huge amount of data, this 5-dimensional space. It actually has an incredible amount of redundancy in it, so it compresses incredibly well. We're seeing it use about 10x more than the standard video. So as a very specific number of what our system is using today, we're using about 30 megabits per second upstream of recording the light field of a whole, the whole image of the scene and sending it up. That's a very specific metric. Now on the downstream, you don't need to send anywhere near as much data that you're sending to the headset, because the headset has a very localized point of view, and you only need a small portion of the light field to cover everywhere that the person can move that you need to display in any reasonable amount of time. Of course, you've got to be able to keep updating where the user's head is so you can change where that is. But that reduced light field, where we're seeing it at about 2x what the typical video of a relative thing is. So there we're using about 6 megabits per second is what we use on a download there. Now, on the latencies of these things, I think the draft gets really a lot of the latencies and power and those types of things very right. However, I think that it sort of occasionally confuses the issue of what the update rate is. Like, hey, the screen's going to update every 15 milliseconds, or we need that much time to update the screen. You don't. You just need to time your other updates with that. So a lot of the latencies aren't actually as bad as they sound in the draft, because you can overlap things in certain ways that make this easier. The system that we're doing has end-to-end latencies that are comparable to video conferencing systems, because it's very similar. It goes up to a cloud running on AWS and then back down to an end user. It will run today over, we'll run it over LTE. Actually, you don't actually really need 5G to make this work, which is, that's our experience anyway. Now, some of the latencies, the latencies about the motion sickness and everything is very real. You have to keep that well under, the sort of 12 milliseconds that you expressed in there. But that's why people are doing all the compute on the head. And the compute and battery power was a real issue to start with. But as each evolution of headset and processors come out, it's way less of a problem on any of the latest generation of headsets. So if you look at a Magic Leap 2 headset, it's a phenomenally better situation than it was. Now, of course, everybody wants to make the headset smaller and lighter and less battery. So I'm not saying that that isn't a constant problem. It always is, but they won't be sort of changing off. So I hope that helps with numbers a little bit. And I'm glad to discuss any more with anybody who's interested. One bit of detail in the draft that seemed wrong to me, and I'm sorry I didn't send an email on this, but it mentions this 0 point some of the 3GPP specs it's reliability 1 and reliability 2 references say that they're going to do like 5 nines over 0.5 milliseconds. I mean, that's only 150 meters at the speed of light. I find that very hard to believe. And when I went and read those specs, I couldn't find any reference to those. So I suspect that those may have been there at one point in time, but the latest version of the specs may have moved them out. So I think that we should, I think there's a lot of things in this draft that come from things 5G might have hoped could be true, but not things that they were promising, and the draft might confuse them a little bit. We might just need to really scan through all the numbers in the draft and make sure they actually check with the references. I think some of them are maybe have become a little dated or a little bit off. Yeah, let me stop there. Thank you.
Sure, Karan, I take your points regarding the 3GPP reference. I'll check the numbers again. And you've made fantastic points about the various devices that are available. One question I had was, have these devices been tested in outdoor environments where, let's say, there are clouds and the light is changing and those kinds of scenarios?
So they've not been, speaking only for the work I've done, has not been tested in super outdoor environments, but it has been done in classic video, like in office rooms with like windows all along the far side where you have changing cloud lighting and lots of stuff like that. You can have very flexible, very diverse lighting, and it still works quite well. But that's an advantage of the light field approach. I think as you move to the polygon and the texture mapping approaches, it's really all about your ability. And look, I've done a lot of work on both of those. We've tried all three of these approaches before we went forward, whether we did. I think that you end up with how good your depth map recovery is. And obviously depth map recovery, I've seen people are doing good depth map recovery on outdoor scenes, but it's a lot harder than doing on a controlled lighting type environment. So I think it's one of those still, your mileage varies widely and you get better depth maps with more controlled lighting if you go down that approach. The light field approach, you're just capturing the color of the light in the room, and it's like, it's less dependent on clouds or fans spinning lights or those types of things than some other systems.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thanks, Colin. And I guess one observation is that probably Renan, you're going to have to go through the recording of this session if you didn't catch all that real time, because I get the sense that there was an awful lot of depth of comment in what Colin had to say. One specific question to Colin, are you suggesting that the document tease out the separate types of XR, the polygons versus raster versus streaming?
Yeah, I would, and I'd be happy to help review as it goes along. But I think that is the reality of what's happening in the marketplace now, and that people, like, maybe there's some other techniques out of those three, but I would say that 95% of the companies working in this space, and there are a credible number of companies working in this space, particularly given the number of people in this room, are using one of those three. I mean, it's certainly, the vast majority. And I think that talking about that makes it easier to understand why you're seeing such different numbers from different people. And it has to do with those techniques.
Great. Thanks, Spencer.
So I'm getting up here to agree with everything Colin said. But I did want to thank the authors for their continued sense of humor hanging with this draft. I think Leslie was exactly right that we had, what we're trying to describe is getting closer to the maturity level that we actually could describe it. And so I think that this is a good time for us to push a bit further. I would say, you'd notice that in the OpsCon draft, one of the bigger changes that was there was our description of video bit rates and things like, and characterizing those. I think that that's a really good model to include in your draft as well. And I'm sorry. Okay. And the last thing I would say, there is nothing that will help people contribute numbers as much as putting in one set of numbers and letting Leslie and Kyle shop those numbers around and say, is this what you're seeing? And if if you've got that in the draft, it really makes it easier for the chairs to make progress, in my opinion. Thank you.
Great points, Spencer. I agree with them.
Great, thanks. So, yeah, Kyle has taken himself out of queue, and he's also locked the queue because we're terminating this section around Q2. But go ahead, Mo.
Mo Zanatti. One thing that confused me when reading the draft was the use case that was presented seemed like it was trying to be representative of most most popular use cases, and then derived some requirements and conclusions from that. And I don't think it really is very representative. As what Colin just described, very, very different. The way that the draft describes the rendering of scenes and images is very, very different than the system that Colin described, which I'm familiar with. And even that system has morphed many times and will morph many more times that I don't think the draft could accurately capture all those permutations. A better starting point would be to look at how game developers, the most popular game developers, actually render things, because that's more likely how most XR applications are going to be architecting their entire solution, from what's being done locally on device to what's being done cloud processing and what's trying to offload somewhere in edge in between. And if you look at the things that really matter, you should look at what matters to the local device. You should look at what the trends are on the local device and how that's dictating network requirements. And the typical trends are increased frame rates. You're getting refresh rates of around 120 hertz on all new devices. So that's 8 millisecond refresh. And it's unlikely that a lot of edge cases are going to allow 8 millisecond round trip with processing involved and everything. So you need to be cognizant of what the real trends here are. And that would be more useful to document than this, I think, kind of contrived use case that is deriving the other things that the draft thinks are relevant.
Are you basically arguing that that there's sort of a minimum viable amount of computing required locally to, in order to make XR viable against motion sickness, et cetera?
I'm arguing that the draft should look at what the trends are in the industry and what matters to the XR experience, and then look at the leading applications that are driving this, and it's mostly gaming. So
sorry, I guess I didn't mean if that was what you were arguing. I mean, is that kind of an example of the sort of thing that
Yes.
you're that is driving those concerns?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Now, Colin was in queue, has left queue. We still have a few minutes left if anybody else wants to add anything today. I'm not seeing anybody rush to the queue. Okay, thank you very much, Renan. And so I'd ask you also to note that Sanjay Mishra did send some comments on the mailing list recently, so I think that gives plenty to follow up.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Okay, so then next up, we are switching over to related IETF work, and we have a report from the hackathon, which I believe Jake is going to do.
All right. Yeah, Jay Collin. So we were working on so we have a multicast quick draft. We presented about that in the quick working group. Hopefully we'll get some discussion there. We were working on an implementation at the hackathon. That is still in progress. I think we're making good progress. We believe it to be possible, and we've learned some good things that have gone into updates to the draft that we've made so far. We've been looking toward, thanks to Luke, I think he's here about the Warp server he's posted. I think that would be a really good place for us to go with that, because it's the quick multicast draft relies on server-initiated data, and Warp uses the server-initiated data in such a way that we think we might be able to apply it, and that will be way better than writing our own player also. So we're hoping to have some useful demo running at some point. We've been working on it in the W3C multicast community group that meets. Well, the working team for that's been meeting weekly. If anybody wants to join in, but we also meet monthly just online, so you can check that out. Anybody that wants to get involved in that. Is there anything else? I would say it's not done yet. I wish it was further along, of course, but it's coming along. We're hopeful that this is actually a plausible thing to do. We just don't have it actually running yet. Any questions? Anybody want to?
Yeah, I would ask if there are any questions, and I would ask you if this is something that you anticipate working on, for instance, at the hackathon in November, or is it all going to be done by then?
Yeah, it depends where it is. I don't imagine everything will be done by then. Like in my perfect world, we'll be like debugging ABR issues at that point or something, rather than trying to get the basic functionality running. But yeah, we got the draft up in maybe May or so, I think, and then we've been like hammering out, bits and pieces of that kind of as time permits. I think none of us are this is our main project, but we would all like to see it work that have been working on it. So we've been hacking on it when we can, and it's not primarily a media thing necessarily, but I mean that's the use case that I have mostly. So so that's what I'm trying to hit a demo that will be able to do that.
Right. Great. So with that, by way of air cover, any questions? Thank you, Jake. All right. Other IETF work going on. There was a media over quick BOF this week, which I'm sure many of you are also at. But Ted Hardy is here to give us a brief overview of how that went down. Ted?
Howdy, folks. Thanks very much for the time today. This was actually the second BOF. There was a previous BOF that discussed the idea of forming this, and the mailing list has been around for a while. So as a second BOF, it was very much focused on the chartering aspect of the discussion. So almost all of the time was taken going through the charter and getting various improvements made into it. I've just put a link to the GitHub repo where the charter is with the current state of the charter. One of the changes suggested in the room and adopted in the room was to make sure that MOQ did a liaison with MOPS, and so that and a couple of other kind of key changes went in as a result of the interventions in the room. If you go and look at the history for July 27th, you'll see all the ones that kind of went in at that date, or the ones that came as a result of the discussion. We then went through the BOF questions, and there was, generally speaking, quite strong agreement that forming a working group based on the recently changed charter was a good idea. There are still a couple of issues that were unresolved in the discussion and that will need to be resolved as it goes through the IESG process. But I think we're anticipating that the IESG will take it to the broader community for commentary relatively soon. And I do see quite a few people in the room there that were also in that room if they want to give their own impressions or if they want to make corrections.
While people are thinking about that, I see that Glenn Dean is in the queue. Glenn?
Hey, hang on here. I'm clicking buttons and I get, hey, so I'm going to appear for live video for like at one moment for the entire IETF this week. So hello, everybody. Ted, hey, I'm glad we got that connection established between mock and MOPS, and I think that's a really good thing. Sort of, any thoughts on how we make that sort of move beyond like into reality versus like, hey, let's put this in a charter. Any thoughts about how operationally we might make that really work well? Because a big part of MOPS, as you know, is to bring in industry engagement. One of the things I see in the mock work that worries me a little bit is that there's some industry engagement, but I like to see more industry engagement, especially from professional media delivery and creation. And so how do we do it even better? Any thoughts?
I think it's always a little bit easier once a group has been formed to convince people that it's worth their time. While something's still in the mailing list stage, I think it's always a little bit harder to say, hey, you should be watching this as it comes into focus. So I'm hopeful that we will get some increased engagement simply from having a charter approved and people knowing that we're working on the protocol mechanics and state machine and all of that. I do agree with you that a lot of what we have right now are people who are very familiar with the networking side and maybe not as familiar with the operation side or with the aspects of the media creation for those parts of the charter which are focused on streaming. So I do hope that some of the folks who do have those connections can help and bring a friend, so to speak, and go there. I also anticipate that now that we've established that there needs to be a connection here, that a regular cadence of making sure that MOPS is invited to any MOQ interims or knows about kind of the milestones that we're hitting that are maybe not the big level of milestones of sending something to the IESG, but oh, by the way, there is an update to this document if you're not on the list. You might want to take a squint at it as it does change some things that may be of interest. So that's really the usual mechanics that you get in the IETF when there's a fair amount of shared membership, and I'm not really thinking at this point that would make a big push out into the broader industry. But if you think that's valuable and have ideas of how to do that, please do at this point let the area directors know, because it's still in their hands.
Well, I think, part of, and this is where the linkage between MOC and MOPS really could work really well for everybody, because part of the mission of MOPS is that industry linkage, right? Trying to draw people in. And so, I mean, the first place I sort of see a real opportunity here is when MOC hits use case space. Use cases are what really drives comments from the broader audience. And so maybe, us over here in MOPS, getting stuff from the MOC flowing in when that happens, and then be able to amplify that message out and funnel it back over would be something we can do together. But I'm looking forward to working together.
Great, thanks very much. I'm glad to hear that. And I guess one of the things we mentioned in the room, just because we didn't get to any technical presentations or conversation, is that we may in fact try and hold some sort of interim between now and IETF115, just to make sure that people who have been working on the technical aspects of MOQ for a while get a chance to share their thoughts. And of course, we'll make sure that when that gets discussed, that MOPS is involved and understands when it's going to happen or the logistics there too.
But just before I go, is the thought, Ted, to make that interim hybrid or in person?
A lot of it depends on how fast the IESG goes through the rest of the processing and what the comments are from the broader community. So if the IESG and the broader community say, yeah, this all looks good and we're ready to hold something that could be hybrid in, let's say, September, then I think hybrid would be the right way to go, because there's obviously a lot of energy you get when people can share their ideas in real time in a space. The current reality is any such meeting will obviously also have a remote component. I mean, just we're not at a situation either for travel for a variety of reasons or for COVID to really rule that out. But I think if it takes a little bit longer, if August turns into kind of a time when very little goes on, and the IESG processing and et cetera goes on mostly in September, then we definitely be looking at remote, just to make sure that we would be able to get the advantage of the quicker logistics. So that turns into time zone math more than any other kind of logistics, and that's it's never easy, but it's a little bit easier than adding time zone math to finding a hotel and making venue arrangements and doing all of that other stuff.
If I can put one idea out there, in order to help connect with industry, one of the things that might be good also is to be sensitive to industry events. So we say September, I'll point out that IBC happens in September. It's a very big industry event, and basically people disappear for about a week and a half during it. So if there was overlap, the ability to get industry engagement might be very difficult during that window. Just FYI.
Okay, is it something where people do things at the front and back of it though? So if we co-locate it, it might be useful.
Sometimes, it starts just after Labor Day. So like I think it's like September 10th or 11th, because Labor Day is late this year, and then runs over the weekend typically into the next week. So typically people do run things back on either side. It depends upon the year and other events that are taking place, and sometimes holidays. So it gets very complicated. September's a complicated month.
Okay, and obviously it would be very quick work to try and get something pulled together for an interim right around Labor Day. If it was September, it's more likely to be later. But if you wouldn't mind sending the details on CCing Alan,
I will.
we'll make sure that the area directors get a hold of those if we do ask them for an interim meeting, because we can obviously also just hold a meeting without it being a full IETF meeting if they haven't gone through the whole process. But I'd much prefer to do everything under Note Well from the beginning and get all that settled. So that would be the intent if we can do it.
Great. Thank you. I think it's time to move along on the queue. And Spencer?
Yeah. So Spencer Dawkins, and I just wanted to do a couple of things. One was to say very clearly at a microphone that I thought the mock off went very well, and appreciate very much Ted and Alan and the mock community for that. A thing I would mention, I was just following up for Glenn as he's thinking about how to talk through the pathway to other operator forums and things like that, is to say that the charter, the last time I looked at it, does have a requirements draft listed there, and at any point that might be very interesting for the operator community to take a look at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you. Ted, you look like you might want to respond.
No, I was actually going to see if I could look at the milestones quickly. So I just flipped to the other window just to see if I could look at the set of deliverables to make sure that I could give the name to that. There's an architecture specification and a working group adoption of use cases and requirements for media delivery over QUIC. And I think that's the one that would map to what
yeah, Spencer is agreeing with that.
Spencer was looking at. So that's definitely in the charter now. I would be a bit surprised to see the ISG cut it in their analysis of the charter, but we'll have to see. I've been surprised so many times over the past few years. I just don't rule it out anymore.
Great, thanks. Helen?
Colin James, I just wanted to respond to a little bit more data to Glenn. I mean, it would definitely be great to see. I think there are some people, I'm going to talk about them in a second, that are operating large video networks that are very involved with the mock stuff. And I'll talk about that in a sec. But it would be obviously great to have more, and it would have great to have somebody like BBC or that class of development system involved. Though I'm not sure it's very relevant to that class of stuff, which is why we haven't seen that group. They already have good solutions to most of their problems. So, but still, it'd be good to hear more from that sort of class of group. But I mean, there's 3 proposals right now in that draft, or being proposed into that working group right now. One from Webex, which is doing 1 billion minutes a day, which is a drop in the bucket compared to what Meta is doing. Meta looks, I couldn't find recent numbers for them, but several years ago they were doing 6 billion minutes a day. So I'm sure they're doing a crap load more than that now. And that's like a drop in the bucket compared to Twitch, which is the third proposal in the group. That's like, you know, it's got like 2.6 million viewers live on it right now as we speak. So I think there's a fair amount of operational experience involved in that working group at some level. And just wanted to pass that on. Thanks.
Yeah, so I don't want to put words in Glenn's mouth or anything, but I think that part of the problem is that some of the people not necessarily represented in the industry there are not the ones operating the big networks you mentioned, but are the ones who are shifting data around on IP networks for other reasons. And the problem the IETF has is they don't have their own solution. And we should be very afraid if they rule their own. So it's as much that we should have them
say peel the next level of that. I'm not sure I really understood. Just be a little more honest. Yeah.
So the point I'm trying to make is not everybody who uses IP protocols is actually involved in the IETF. Shocker, has been true for 20 years. But part of the point that we raised when we formed MOPS and everything leading up to it was the fact that there is a lot of video being shipped over IP, whether or not it's in the traditionally internet-oriented companies. And so what we're saying now is some of those companies are still shipping video over IP, should make use of more IETF protocols. MOC might be creating one of them. So it would be better if it was informed by their use cases rather than being yet another solution that works very well for those who are involved in the internet. And we have more crap out there that, sorry, I have to remind myself to breathe. We have more crap out there that abuses the internet protocol stack as we know it. So in some ways, it's more our interest to make sure that we can loop more industries into using the internet well than saying anything against what's going on in MOC. Maybe that's clearer?
Yeah, that's fair. But can you say a little more about like which class of industry or class of use cases are you thinking about? I'm not asking for names of companies or anything, but just sort of like what type of
all the industries that are shipping around IP for their own editing purposes and in their own workflows across networks that are perhaps geographically diverse.
Right. Okay, so that's what I mentioned, like, I'd love to see somebody like BBC. I mean, they're an example of that, right? For sure, they clearly do it. But I work with them on a regular basis, and I think that the thing is they have a class of solutions that are very applicable to their stuff. And it's a very standardized area. It's just not standardized at IETF. And I'm not sure that what we're doing in MOC at all aligns with their needs.
So I saw that Glenn had his hand up again as our tech advisor. So I think I'm going to let him jump the closed queue.
For sure.
Yeah, forgive me, hang on, pushing buttons. So Colin, I think the vision I'm trying to put out here is that while there's use cases today, I think which you're right, this doesn't satisfy some media use cases. Absolutely. On the other hand, media companies are really branching out into a lot of new areas, and even if they're not in that business today as one of their storefront items. And then I think that there may be useful connections that could be made here. And ultimately, what I'm really, I'll be very honest here. I have two goals here. I want to get them into the IETF because that means more participation and that means better standards. And I also want them to get using IETF stuff more because that means less, in-house solutions and more standards, which is good for everybody. And I see this at the early stages, since it is early stages. I realize you've done a lot of work on it, but it is still early stages from the IETF's perspective. It's a great opportunity to sort of wrangle them in, make those connections, and get them engaged. And it won't all happen overnight, and we won't get everybody in the room all at once. But it's a grind, right? And so, anyways, I think we're
totally agree, and let me know how I can help.
Okay.
Well, I think the biggest thing is bring a friend, right? So if there are people you see that need to be in that room, make sure that you encourage them, make sure we know that we need to encourage them, and we're definitely willing to do that. Thanks.
Great. I'm not seeing any other questions or comments in the room. So thank you very much, Ted, for coming along and sharing that update and engaging with us. Right. Next up. Yes, next up we have Chris Lemons with an update from the SVA CTA.
I suppose I'll stand up here. All right. All right. Can you hear me? Excellent. All right. I'm Chris Lemons. I am here on behalf at the moment of the CTA WAVE project, and specifically the CMSD, CAT, and SMT working groups. I just wanted to give you a general idea of some of the drafts that are coming out of that group and maybe get some cross-pollination. Next slide. Okay, so first off, all of these drafts are the work, combined effort of the SVA and the CTA. So the Software Video Alliance and the Consumer Technology Association, specifically the Web Application Video Ecosystem Group, are working together to produce these standards. Talk about the Common Media Server Data, Common Access Token, Streaming Media Tracing, and I'm just going to go very high level on these. Next slide. So the Common Media Server Data is the other half of the Common Media Client Data, which is published as CTA 5004. This draft is nearing completion, and its job is to carry data from the origin down towards the clients, whereas the CMCD specification carries data from the clients upwards. The goal here is to carry data that CDNs can use operationally to make decisions about how they are going to handle the data more intelligently. It's split into two headers: the CMSD static header, which is data about the media object itself, and the dynamic header, which is data about the connection that is transferring the object. Next slide. I am not going to go into all of the keys, but I did put them up on the screen for you. These are the attributes of the object and the origin's response. Next slide. Same story. These are the key attributes that are about the specific response, and all of these are added together like proxy status and cache status into an agglutinative header. Next slide. All right, moving on to the Common Access Token. This is very similar to the URI signing token work out of the CDNI working group. This token is focusing on the streaming media uses, very similar to what some of the work in the CDNI group was doing. The goal here, though, is to have one token that covers all of the existing industry use cases. Adoption is key. We have a lot of energy in the room, a lot of different players, and I'm actually very optimistic for implementation of this fairly widely. Next slide. Okay, again, not going to go through all of these, but these are the claims that it has. We start off with the core claims that you would expect in any CWT. Yes, the token is based on the CWT format, and it goes usually in the URI. And then we have a bunch of general claims that are details about exactly what kinds of attributes of the request the token is valid for, so that you can limit it to specific sorts of URIs, specific methods, say that this token can be used for a get but not a push, and so on. Next slide. Composition claims. This is somewhat new to CWTs in general. Was created for the CAT, and we have two kinds there. The and, or, and nor Boolean logic claims do exactly what you expect, what they say on the tin. And they will have lists of claims inside them, and so that you can do the logic on that. We also have an encrypted claim, because sometimes you don't want certain kinds of information being stored easily readable in the URI. And other information needs to be secret from the holder of the URI. So we have an encrypted claim as well. The critical claim there is there to facilitate the encrypted claim. Since we have composite claims, or composition claims, we have to have implementation limits. Right now we've got that set at about 4 levels of nesting and 50 list elements. But we have some more maximums that, or well, technically these are defined as implementation minimums. You have to support at least this much, but we know operationally that means maximum. Next slide. Action claims. These are interesting in that these are claims that do not limit the utility of the token, but they affect the response of the verifier. The renewal claim is very similar to the renewal that you'd see in the Tcdn working group token. And it can be renewed as either a cookie or a header. And this allows you to specify the parameters on the cookie in case you want to have your cookie be something like same site strict, which is great. The if control response is still being worked on, but the idea is that we want the issuer of the token to be able to set a location or a particular content code, a status code to be returned when the token doesn't verify. So it puts them in the driver's seat. Next slide. Moving right along, we have the streaming media tracing group. This is a very new group of which I am one of the co-chairs. We don't have any specification language set, but we have finally settled on 3 major scopes for this work. We have the push, pull, and export model, where the push is covering tracing all the way from, for specifically streaming media, all the way from the camera lens to the origin, and keeping track of the entities that process it along the way and the latencies introduced and that sort of thing. Export is about taking it off of the line from the camera to the viewer and sending the logs or traces to a third entity. And we are looking heavily at the open telemetry specification for that because it does that very well. And so we want to use existing standards wherever possible. For the pull process, that is in tracing in-band for HTTP requests and responses, and we're actually expecting that even though streaming media is our primary use case, this may be something that is also fairly generalizable because HTTP is just HTTP. The goal here, though, is to collect and report observational data, even if it's not immediately actionable. Next slide. A number of these use agglutinative headers. So these are headers like via, cache status, proxy status, and the idea is that each entity that processes one of these requests will add their name, whatever they decide their name is, along with the parameters that are appropriate to that particular header. This is how these existing headers work. We are trying to encourage, because we're getting a fairly reasonable number of agglutinative headers, one of the things we're looking at is we're trying to encourage entities to make sure they use the same name for themselves, whatever they are, when they put values in more than one of these headers at a time. That'll help when the data gets exported or needs to be cross-compared for whatever reasons. Next slide. And I think I may have a few minutes left for questions.
Indeed you do. Any questions?
Hearing none,
Hey,
thank you very
Eric,
much.
you want to voice what you said at the mic, possibly? Just a little encouragement.
Sure. For the common access tokens, hopefully you're not allowing those to be locked to IP addresses. That's one thing that for those sorts of access tokens, locking them to IP addresses causes no end of operational pain.
You're right. And there is a lot of text in there saying that IP addresses are almost useless for identifying people or systems, and you should never use them. And yet, the goal is adoption, and it is effectively an industry requirement. So the compromise is effectively the same compromise that the CDNI working group took when they did the exact set, when they were faced with the exact same problem. Any IP addresses that are more specific than 24/24 or /56 as appropriate must be in the encrypted claims. The encrypted claims are a lot more difficult to use, and I'm frankly kind of hoping that no one ever needs to use them. But they do exist there, and there is a use case for them, as little as I like that.
it's not just a specificity issue, it's also one of the biggest blockers to getting media content on IPv6 we've seen. So it becomes a really big operational headache because you have a token that gets set on V4 and then try to be redeemed on V6. Similar things happen with things like privacy proxies. So it may be worth looking at, and this might be even something for MOPS to look at, is there some way to be much more clear to industry saying, no, stop doing this. This is a problem, because I've also seen that case where some industry groups will try to say, oh, well, our standard is you need to lock tokens to IP addresses, and I think having some standards groups come out and say, no, don't do that, that you could also point people at, might be better than just pointing them at blog posts telling them not to do it.
Yeah, and I agree. The goal with this particular token is not to enforce anyone's particular business model, even if that business model has very significant operational problems. We've tried probably 3 or 4 times to remove the ability to lock tokens to IP addresses from the drafts. And there are just too many people who have said, we won't implement this, or we will implement some variation of this regardless of what the specification says. The CTA is very much like the IETF in that we don't have a police force.
So not having looked at what the industry, what the industry is doing in this area very closely, has there been an attempt to sort of reveal and document the reasons why industry players want to use IP addresses in their claims, and what better alternatives there are for achieving the same goals?
Yeah, so there's a couple of really simple use cases that IP addresses just make really easy. And a very standard one that keeps coming up again and again is, I just want to let anyone in who comes in on a 10 dot address, right? I trust those addresses. I don't care. And so I get it. That's how their things are set up. And while I don't think that that's necessarily the most robust way to do things, that is how they have it set up operationally. And they have a need for that sort of capability. And yes, there are multiple paragraphs of text saying why this is a bad idea.
Yeah, I was more suggesting okay, this is a bad idea, and here are some alternatives. I think it's the second part that may be that I don't know what the status of that is. Not just in your draft, but also in sort of documentation that the industry has overall in this area. I just don't know if it's something that people have spent a lot of time on, given that, hey, we've got IP addresses and we could just use those in our claims.
Well, I mean, as operationally, as was pointed out, you mostly can't. Dual stack devices changing their IP addresses, devices that have IPv6 addresses, all of that is a significant operational concern. Entities that deploy this and expect IP address to work on the bare internet are going to disappoint their customers.
Great. Not
Thank
seeing
you.
any other questions or comments. Thank you very much, Chris.
And if you want more information about the CDNI or about the Common Access Token, there will be a slightly more in-depth presentation in the CDNI working group.
Great. Thank you. All right. So next up, we have Luis Contreras telling us about real world stuff.
So hello, everyone. I would like to share with all of you one initiative that we are running in Telefonica with the objective of trying to make the delivery of content network aware. So we are doing an exercise of integrating Alto in such a way that through Alto we can expose all this network information that could feed the CDN logic, and with that improve the performance. I will present on behalf of my colleagues, Patricia, Anais, and Francisco. As you can see, this is a joint work between the transport group and the video group. And yeah, I will provide the details. So next slide, please. Thank you. So a little bit about background of Telefonica, because it's important thinking on the next steps. We are, Telefonica is a group of different companies, different operational business present in 15 countries, mostly Latin America and Europe, plus a tier 1 international carrier. So we provide multiple services, as you can imagine, residential, mobile, and so. But also we have contents that we distribute. We have contents produced by ourselves, and with several brands like Movistar Plus and Movistar Play, but also we deliver third-party contents, right? We do this through an in-house CDN that has been developed by the video group. This is called, I will refer to that as Telefonica CDN or Tcdn. And this Tcdn is worldwide deployed. We have, you can see there the list of countries where we have different streamers, delivery points. We have in Spain, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Mexico, Uruguay, and the USA. And we are starting to deploy as well in Germany. So trying to cover all the footprint of Telefonica in order to deliver all these contents. The mechanisms for delivering is based on HTTP adaptive streaming, and this is used for serving either internal or external customers. So somehow we are delivering the content over the top, so external customers to Telefonica can receive as well this content. So thinking or talking a little bit about the CDN, the logic that the CDN is using for deciding what is the streamer more convenient for a given customer. So essentially, the request routing logic that is being used take into account a number of inputs. The streamer health status, the load level, the availability of the content, the cache hit ratio maximization, and so on so far. But also, and importantly, and this is the topic of interest, let's say, for this presentation, is also the network topology. By now, this network topology is fed into the CDN logic manually. So somehow there is a group of people with taking into consideration where the different prefixes of the different customers are located in the distinct points of presence of the Telefonica networks, and this is fed, as I told you, manually, and somehow this is the kind of problem that we would like to solve. No, this is the initial driver for this activity, in fact. So how we could go in an automatic manner of maintaining these maps. Being provided in an automatic way. The reason of going in this direction is because the different prefixes of the network can be changed because there are consolidation of accesses, so migrating, for instance, for DSL access to fiber, and so this implies that sometimes the addresses of the IP addresses are reused between different points of presence. Also, there could be events in the network that could motivate that the previous selection based on this manual feeding could not be the optimal, and so on and so far. So this was essentially the driver and the motivation for this work. So next slide, please. So the rationale of making the Tcdn transport network aware is, again, to optimize the delivery. So at the end, what we want to do is to have a more efficient way of delivering the traffic to the customer where this customer is. So with this static view, with this manual feeding of the topologies, we have these situations that cannot be controlled, network outages, network congestion, the migration of the prefixes, and so on. So this requires a periodic and upgrade of these network maps. And well, what we pursue essentially is to have this with a timely information in an automatic way, and this is why we leverage in Alto for doing that. Next slide, please. So how the network looks like, because it's important to understand what is, let's say, the playground for all this work. No? The networks on Telefonica, well, you saw before, we have so many networks in very in so many countries. So there is not a common pattern, but somehow this would reflect a common pattern that we are following at the time of designing the Telefonica networks. So we divide in a number of hierarchical levels. What you can see there is a kind of topology or a canonical topology that we could have in a mid-sized country. So we have the hierarchical level 1 that represent the interconnection level for interconnecting to other transit providers, or either the tier 1 from Telefonica, but also other transit providers or OTTs or whoever. Then we have the hierarchical level 2 that would be a mesh part of the network that takes essentially the traffic coming from the boundaries, from the peering and from the transit, and then distributing to the different regions. And then we start in the topology that is covering the different regions. That would be the hierarchical level 3, which essentially is a kind of dual headings in some regions or so, depending on the size of the region. For sure, it could be more than 2. And then we have the local level, the hierarchical level 4, which represents basically the central offices, and then hierarchical level 5 or even 6, that is essentially could represent the more remote areas or the cell site routers and so connecting the different customers. So the customers are essentially, as today, connected in local level, in the hierarchical level 4, hierarchical level 5, or could be even connected in hierarchical level 6. As you can imagine, not all the countries have the same structure. It's not the same as Spain as Brazil or Germany as Argentina or Chile. Are very different geographies, and this implies different kind of architectures. Just for putting an example, if you put Brazil on top of the map of Europe, we will be covering an area like from Lisbon to Moscow. So it's different sizes that can modify somehow this canonical architecture. Let's move to the next slide. Just to present what could be, I mean, we saw before what would be a canonical architecture. This is an excerpt representing some existing deployment in the operation in Spain. And here we represent some few nodes for a hierarchical level 1, 2, and 3. A hierarchical level 1 would be represented by the circles, layer 2 by the squares, and layer 3 by the triangles. So these represent the upper part. So from this part below, we have the central offices, we have the cell site routers and the remote areas, and so on and so far. So the idea is we have some streamers deployed in the network. So how we can improve, how we can maintain the optimal delivery of the video as long as we suffer these changes in the network. Again, changes in the movement of the prefixes across the different central offices, changes in the network itself, because there could be link outages or node outages or so. So trying to find a mechanism to optimize this delivery in real time, let's say. So next slide, please. So how Tcdn could leverage on the Alto information, and the information exposed by Alto in relation with the topology and so. So essentially the objective here would be to create a network map where we can somehow associate different prefixes to different identifiers that are called PIDs. With that, somehow we can group the prefixes of the customers in the central offices, the ranges, the /24, /20 or whatever. With that, I mean, we create PIDs for customers, identifying the prefixes of the customers, and then also we generate PIDs associated to the streamers in such a way that through these maps, we can have a timely view of what will be the cost and the reachability between the different PIDs in the network. So essentially, how the streamers can be reached, or how the streamers can reach the different customers, and identifying the cost associated to that. We will detail a little bit later, but this cost, essentially now, we are playing with a number of hubs, but could be some more richer information in some point in time. So we are working also in that direction. So what we do with these maps is to determine what will be in every time the more convenient streamer to deliver the content according to the request that is coming from the customer. You can see there a very simple example that we use in the lab in the primary steps in this work, and you can see reflected the basic idea. So the PIDs of the streamers can correlate it with the PIDs of the customers, and with that perform the best selection. let's move to the next slide, please. So this represents the network map and the cost map. So in the network map, as I told you before, is essentially the grouping of the different prefixes to the PIDs. And here, this is related to the example before, so you can check later on offline. And then we have the cost map that shows the reachability between the different PIDs. So in a very straightforward manner, we can select, we can filter, and we can select what could be the most convenient streamer for a specific group of prefixes in the network. The network map is generated through establishing BGP sessions between Alto and some root reflector in the network. So with BGP, we can advertise the prefixes associated to the end users in the central offices as they are being configured. At the end, the prefixes are associated to the BNG, which is the element ending the PPP session. So the BGP is in these central offices, and the BGP is integrated with a router that can the possibility of advertising these prefixes. So this is in one hand, the advertisement of the prefixes associated to the customers and to the streamers. And then in the other hand, we have the topology itself. For that, we use BGPLS. And with BGPLS, we can have the view of the nodes and the links interconnecting the different nodes in the network. So the final result is that we can build this cost map, which essentially is represents, let's say, the reachability between streamers and users. Next slide, please. So the process that we follow in this integration was first to start the feasibility phase in the lab. So we played with a very simplistic or a couple of very simplistic scenarios. These are documented in the backup slides, so you can take a look later on. So we are starting essentially to understand the feasibility of this mechanism for having an up-to-date view of the network. So introducing outages, introducing new prefixes, and so in such a way that we verify that the feasibility of this exercise. Then we move to a pre-production lab. I will provide more details later in the next slide, but we move a pre-production lab where we started to play with real configurations in the network, real situations that we could find in the network, but in a more controlled environment. So reduced number of devices, but the complexities of the configuration that we would face once we move to production. And we are now in the point of moving into production. We are working on the deployment of Alto in the real network. We will start with Telefonica Spain, with the idea of moving later on to other companies in the group. And here the point now that we are doing is trying to introduce Alto in the specific rules and processes and procedures and so that a production network implies in terms of securitization, hardening all the stuff, playing with the different IP addresses for connectivity within the different elements, and so on and so forth. I will provide now more details on all these engineering steps. So next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide provides a little bit of details about what were the engineering path that we follow and what issues we faced in this process. In the technology lab test, essentially we started with the Alto module that is present in Open Daylight. This module was working initially with LLDP. So our first task that we do was to integrate with the BGP module of Open Daylight. In this technology lab test, we start playing with a mono-vendor router scenario. These routers were virtualized, so we were playing in some servers and so, generating the issues, as I mentioned before, the outages of the nodes, outages of the links, creating new prefixes, and so on and so forth. We play with a very simplistic network with just one single IEP on top of that, or SPF in that case, a single autonomous system, and simple metrics based on the hop count. So essentially, the metric that we associated to the IEP was just one, so in such a way that we could determine the hop count, and that was what you saw before in the cost map that I presented before. And also in this setup, the routers themselves, some of the routers themselves were acting as road reflectors. So very simplistic setup in this case, with Alto as well being virtualized in that server that I mentioned before. From this, we moved to the pre-production network test. Now the things started to change. We migrated to ExaBGP as an open source BGP speaker for interacting with real route reflectors in this pre-production environment. We, in this exercise of migrating to XBGP, we found some issues for BGPLS. We raised a number of tickets. You have the details if you want to check. These issues were basically related to BGPLS. At the time of parsing the information of BGPLS, in order to build to be able to build the cost map, okay, the relationship between the PIDs that I mentioned before. This pre-production network environment is a multi-vendor router scenario. And the router vendors that are present in this in both pre-production and production network are different to the ones from the lab test. So essentially, we have tested at the end 3 different vendors on this setup. And this multi-vendor scenario is the real one because, well, the production network leverages or is supported by the different vendors in reality. These routers in the pre-production environment are physical routers. We also deployed a dedicated Alto server there, so no longer virtualized on the same environment. So it's just a dedicated server. And then we started with this network that well generated a number of issues in the sense that it's a complex MPLS network. So we don't have an IP continuity end to end in the different hierarchical levels that you saw at the beginning. We have, however, an MPLS continuity. And this presents some issues at the time of integrating because, well, you need to deal with different autonomous systems, some of them private, for sure the public autonomous system as well. And moving all this information with the different vendor implementations created some, let's say, engineering problems that we had to resolve in order to be able to expose all the topology to, I mean, to digest, let's say, all the topology information by the Alto server and then to expose to the Telefonica Cdn. Yeah, also we start playing with more sophisticated metrics. Sophisticated in the sense that we're not just assigning a value of 1 for the IGP metric, but playing with the real IGP metrics as we could found in the production network. So having richer, let's say, cost map, richer values in the cost map, not only the hops, but playing actually with the IGP metrics there. And finally, also another point that was different to the technology lab test was the connection to different route reflectors. Some route reflectors for BGP, I mean, a couple of route reflectors for BGP information, another couple of route reflectors for BGP-LS. This was because it's somehow mimicking what we have in the production network. And finally, as I mentioned before, we are in the pace of integrating all of this in the production network. So we are in the very hard phase of the administrative issues for adapting to the production procedures, the hardening environment, as I told you before, for the hardware for sure, but also for the software, because these most of the pieces are coming from open source. So we need to follow the internal rules of the engineering teams in the operational business units, right? Also, the one situation that we have now in the real network is that we don't have a broad activation of BGPLS on that. So we will start with some small region in the network that has already activated the BGPLS, and from that we will start growing. This is not, I mean, this is even a good thing for us in such a way that with that we will be able to test also the scalability of all of this. We have played I didn't mention, but in the production network we could start playing with 30, 40 routers, but in production network this will rise to several thousand of routers. So we need also to have a view of how scalable will be the solution, and this will be part of the insights that we will get once we move into the production network, the scalability at the end. And yeah, for sure, this will coexist with so many services. This will be also a learning process, how to deal with that. We don't expect any interference with that because at the end we are connecting to the route reflector. So we are doing nothing in the network, just simply taking the information from the route reflectors. But okay, there is always uncertainty what could be, if something could happen, right? We expect to complete the deployment by the end of this year, and we hope to comment in the next MOPS, maybe the updates on this. Next slide, please. So just for finishing, as next steps, we will start with integration in Telefonica Spain network for later moving into the other countries of Telefonica where we have the Tcdn deployed. Probably the next step will be Brazil. This is something that we need to decide. And again, Brazil is a very large challenge in the sense that it's a very big network. So, and also the topology is not so canonical, as we saw before. So it's a very good challenge that we start to face starting in next year, hopefully. So apart from that, we also need to complete the full development of the Tcdn logic. So the idea is that the Tcdn logic consumes the information that is provided by Alto. So we also need to work on that line to, let's say, how to say, to refine the way in which we are interacting today with Alto. So making more integrating better in the CDN logic at the end. But by now it's just a kind of proof of concept in this sense. And yeah, importantly, we expect to characterize Alto performance on real environment. In terms of scalability, processing, we will require many instances of Alto, and so this is also something that we will see once we start playing with Alto in the real environment. Again, because we will handle with thousands of routers, so it's a very huge network at the end. Another line of work, so by now we are working for the topology in order to do this enhanced delivery and so on, trying to guarantee the quality of experience, but we already do foresee the next steps in the direction of integrating or enriching the cost map by introducing performance metrics, for instance. So understanding what are the congestion levels, maybe understanding what is the latency that we could have between the different PIDs. So enriching the decision at the end. We will start by the hop counts because it's or IGP metrics because it's the basic stuff, but we do foresee to do more advanced metrics in such a way that we could enrich even the decision in the CDN. Also, we are considering to include access network information, so to have some idea what could be the technology associated to a specific prefix in the customer side, so that we could have some insight about if the customer is accessing by fiber or DSL or mobile technology or whatever. So next slide, please. This is the very final one. So as conclusion, the objective of all of this is to make the CDN network aware, so to have the possibility of exposing network information to applications that could leverage on that network information to perform better, and Tcdn is a clear case on this respect. And we also, apart from this integration work that we are doing, we are foreseeing this next step that will be to enrich the decisions, incorporating these metrics that adds an additional complexity that we hope to report in some point in time also here for the media operations community. We would like also to ask for feedback from MOPS. It would be very welcome to understand if this is useful, if this is a good direction to consider, I don't know, to get your views on this respect. So you can approach directly us, or even would be even more interesting if you could also use the Alto working group list for this. So somehow that we could discuss in the mailing list from Alto that probably would enrich also and inform also the guys working in Alto as well. And just let me finish with the acknowledgements to Kai Gao and Jensen San that helped us a lot at the beginning with the technology, with the lab test and the integration with ODL and so, and a big thank you for them for their help. And that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Rajiv, you've been very patient. Would you like to ask your question?
Hi. So this is actually going back to your slide where you were talking about calculating the cost maps. Would it be possible to move back to that slide if you could? Yes, this one. So I see what you've kind of done here is, you basically have a couple of Tcdn nodes, that's the PIDs ending in 05 and 06, and a number of customer nodes, right, which you've allotted PIDs for. Now, I see that you typically aren't just calculating the cost map of the routes, to the Tcdn nodes from the customer. You're also calculating the cost maps across customer to customer. Is there any specific reason why you're doing that?
I couldn't get, apologies, but the sound was very bad. I couldn't get the question. Could you repeat the last part?
Okay, so I see you're calculating the cost not only of the routes from the customer endpoint to the Tcdn nodes, you're also calculating the cost from customer to customer. So customer with PID 01 to PID 03, for example. Is there any specific reason why you're doing that?
Yeah, well, this is essentially would be the let's say the standard output of Alto. So on top of this cost map, so the idea would be to for us is not interesting, at least with the integration with the CDN, is not interesting to have the reachability between customers. So this would be filtered. So the next step would be on top of this cost map to filter and only retain the reachability between the streamers and the different users. So by now we will not use the user-to-user information. No.
Okay, so this cost map will go through another layer of filtering before it's actually used as input to your routing logic.
I couldn't get you again. Sorry.
Okay, so I was just saying this cost map would go through another layer of filtering before you use it as input for your routing logic. Okay, and my second question here is in the slide exactly previous to this, can you move back one slide where you're allotting the PIDs? I'm assuming you are looking at PIDs not at the level of individual users, but at the level of individual user segments. So each /24 rather than each user who is in each /24. I just want to know if that assumption is correct.
I'm not sure if I understood the question. You mean that we are looking at PID level, not at the specific prefix of the customer? Is that the question?
Yeah, no. I mean, are you allotting the PIDs for each prefix, or are you allotting it for each customer?
Sorry, I couldn't understand you well. No.
Okay.
Rajiv, your audio is really
okay.
really
Is this better?
No, not at all.
Okay. I will be back in a moment, hopefully with better audio.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
So we can take Eric's question now.
So Eric Cisco, without any yet, except interested about what you are doing. So thank you for the presentation. That really shows as well that MOPS is very different kind of point of view. Got a question. How often are those maps recomputed, or how often can a change be done?
Well, by now this is
Hello, this is
an asynchronous way of retrieving the map. So the CDN will ask, no, I mean, we have not specified a frequency for these updates. So would it be, I mean, this is not yet considered at all, but we don't expect a continuous update of the streaming. So take into account that somehow we are now with the manual procedure, we are somehow updating the maps every 6 months.
No.
So even if we go to a daily retrieval of the information, would be a great advance. So, but we don't have yet, we have not thought yet how will be the frequency of updating, but you can do weekly or daily, something like that.
Okay, so my next question would have been, how disruptive is it? Because if you were doing it every minute, could disrupt a couple of streams, right?
Yeah.
But if you do it daily, I mean, I guess you don't care so much.
Will be something like that. Maybe weekly. I mean, probably the more frequent changes that, or the changes that could be more representative for a real-time feedback could be network outages or so. This would impact in some part of the network, maybe not on that. But even in that case, you could retrieve an update, even in case of some outage. So, but would be discrete events along the time, so not every minute, not every hours. So.
Okay, thank you. And the last one, I guess it assumes that the network is the same MTU everywhere, right? Or
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Rajiv, would you like to try again?
Yes, I hope this audio is better.
Yes.
Much.
Thankfully. Okay, so my second question was basically with regards to allotting the PIDs for the end users. So are you actually looking at PIDs for every end user, or is it more like one PID per unique end user prefix, /24 prefix?
Oh, okay, now I got it. No, these PIDs will be per central office. So essentially, you will associate to the prefixes that you have declared in the BNG that is in a central office.
Okay.
So you group a bunch of prefixes in the same PID.
Okay, so basically the resolution is per prefix rather than per user. So that's the resolution you're going for. Okay,
Yeah.
that was the question. And my last question is, there are similar efforts in place right now. Though they are more tied to specific cloud vendors and stuff like that, to make this kind of internal telco network topology consumable as a service for people who are looking at doing some sort of service delivery using deep edge nodes in 5G and MEC environments. So do you have plans to eventually make this or at least a subset of this information available outside of your integration with Tcdn and make it consumable by other potential people who are hosting on the MEC?
Yes, as we do for Alto, in general, is to play the role of as a network spatial function for whoever customer. It could be internal customer or external customer. And with these exposure capabilities, so to expose topology, but also other additional capabilities that we are proposing in the Alto working group. So the general answer to the answer to your question would be yes. We are going in that direction, and yeah. So the idea would be to make all this information available in such a way that we can optimize the delivery or the usage of the network in general.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. And I think Sanjay is next.
Hi, this is Sanjay Mishra. I think this is a very good presentation and very useful. One question I have is that, so I get the association of PID and the IP subnet. Now, how important is that relationship with the CDN streamers? Because I assume that content is replicated on all the CDN streamers, right? So that information pretty much remains static.
Well, the contents are not in all the streamers. I mean, it could vary. I mean, you don't have the same information in all the streamers.
Okay, so
not necessarily.
Okay, the content may not be necessarily.
Yes.
So in that way, you want to make sure that for a given request, then you have to have extra logic to force that IP subnet to always fetch content from that particular streamer then.
Yes. This extra logic, for instance, would perform this filtering that I commented before in the question from Rajib. And so what I presented today is simply how we expose the information, but yeah, the logic in the CDN side will need to do yet a lot of more things. So filtering and then taking into account where the content is and so on. So that development is also in progress.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And Kyle has again closed the queue. I don't see anybody trying to rush that block. Thank you very much. All right, we are at the time of any other business. Are there any other points we should be covering today? Anyone? Anyone? If not, I think we will declare victory for today. Thank you all very much for coming out. And thank you again, Chris, for taking such wonderful notes. And we will see you all on the mailing list. Thank you. You'll be right back.